everybody? Welcome to Straight Out of BS podcast. Thank you guys for your continued support. You guys are awesome. I was mistaken the other day. I thought I was about to become monetized, but then still YouTube, 1,000 subscribers. So still, I'm almost like halfway there. I'm pretty much halfway there. We're getting there. But the point being is that like I never started this to make money in the first place. So if that happens, it happens. That's cool. But I really could care less. But just wanted to let people know that we are making a difference. We are getting the word out there. More and more people are subscribing. If you share the videos, it really helps the algorithm. Liking the videos helps the algorithm. If you're not subscribed to the channel already, that would help. And I just want to thank all the Patreon members and all my supporters that have helped me up to this point. It really means the world to me. Nothing's ever expected, so it really means the world to me when people, go out of their way to help with my cause and what I'm doing. So I appreciate that. If anybody's interested in that kind of stuff, links are in the description. I want to do a moment of silence for the person still suffering with intrusive thoughts or addiction or anything like that. So on the count of 3, I'm going to do a moment of silence. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you for that. And without further ado, I want to go ahead and introduce my guest for the day. Go ahead and introduce yourself and kind of just like a brief little like history about yourself, like your history with like the Litchfields and whatnot, and then like what school you went to.
Sure. Yeah. I'm Nathaniel Litchfield, son of Narvinlitchfield, nephew of Robert Litchfield. And in 2004, I was sent to Dundee / it hadn't yet become Pillars of Hope, but I was sent down to that property for about 2 months, and then I went up to Carolina Springs Academy for about 5 months, roughly.
Okay. And can you walk us and I just want to let you know that if I ask any questions that you don't want to answer, that's perfectly fine. That's not a problem. But I was just gonna ask, like, can you go in a little bit, like just how it was like growing up, and just like the dynamics of the household, and just like what led up to you being sent away, stuff like that?
Sure. Yeah, I think it was a Mormon household, pretty traditionally Mormon in that Narvin was the head. Wasn't supposed to be questioned really in anything. I'm the oldest. I have 3 biological sisters younger than me. It was a bit of a rough childhood. Just growing up, there was a lot of pressure to kind of conform to Narvin's idea of what he wanted from a son, and I was kind of not that thing from the beginning. So I would say what the most complicated part of that dynamic was just obviously he was a very physically abusive guy, very mentally abusive, very manipulative, and he tended to wanted to do things that uprooted us. He always wanted to be as far away from other family members as possible. He kind of always wanted to have us isolated. So when the opportunity came to open his own program, he took us all the way across the country to Carolina Springs in South Carolina from Utah. What led to me being put in the program was pretty simple. It was after my parents divorced. My mom remarried to a guy that just did not like me very much. And my grades were suffering. I was pretty depressed. I was having a really hard time, and especially with motivation, I was just not really seeing a lot of future for myself at the time. I'm struggling to reconnect with my family and wishing my family was still together at the time, as I think most young kids of broken homes wish, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, with my grades being so poor, my stepfather took the opportunity to just be like, well, you guys have this in your family. And, he was another patriarch sort. So he made the call, sent me out there. And, yeah, that was how I got to see all that shit firsthand.
Okay. How did you get to Dundee Ranch? Were you transported? Did your family bring you up there?
Sad to say, I flew by myself out there. I was, as a cousin put it at the time, I was a trooper about it at first. I was just like, okay, this is what they want me to do. This is what I'm gonna do. Um, I had a very different image in my head of what the programs were. At that age, a lot of that was hidden from us. A lot of that was kept from us, even when we were living, on the property or very close by, growing up next to Carolina Springs.
Were you shown any brochures or anything beforehand? Like, how was it? Like, what did you think it was going to be like? Like, what planted that image in your head? What you thought it was going to be like?
So, as I was about 11 when we moved out to Carolina, and we lived on the property for about, it's hard to say, 6 months maybe. And while we were there, my father often took me and my sisters around the campus. But obviously, the poor kids there had to be on their best behavior.
Mm-hmm.
The owner of the program was walking through, so everybody was dead silent, or, we never ever saw anybody, get restrained or anything like that, because everyone was just on complete lockdown when we were kids, right?
Yeah.
So that's what it was in my head. I thought it was just a very disciplined, as he put it to us, it was a military style boarding school.
Okay.
So that's when I was 16, 17, that's all I thought it was.
Okay. Do you have any idea when he got the idea, when and where he got the idea for these schools?
Well, it was Robert. As they go into in the documentary a little bit, the all of the programs, all the template for all of the programs really came from LifeSpring, the LifeSpring seminars that Robert and Narvin attended in the the 80s. They both attended these seminars. They just saw an opportunity. They were like, oh my God, we could apply this to this growing industry that already exists of residential treatment centers and just, make a fortune.
I wonder how they came across like those in the first place. You know what I mean? Back in the
It was
day.
my understanding that it was sort of a trend among young Mormon, like yuppie types.
Okay.
It was just a big, that kind of thing often goes through that community. These trends of like self-help type, philosophies, books, whatever, what have you. The seminars were just big in the 80s.
Was this around the same time that 12 step had started?
It had to have been. It was all in that same general time frame, right?
Yeah. Okay. When you got there, do you remember them what do you remember about when you first got there? Do you remember them buddying you up with somebody to show you the rules, show you the ropes? Do you remember them giving you a rule manual? I know that you said that your experience was obviously probably dampered down a bit compared to the other people's experience, but I'm just curious what your experience was like.
It was, so the main point of difference was just that I didn't actually stay in the dorms.
Okay.
My dad still had a property out there. So at, about, it was probably about 5 a.m. I would get up. I'd be taken to the program by Billy, the transporter. I would stay at the program all day, and then he would take me home around 9 o'clock just to go to bed. So I wasn't in like a family, I didn't have any, I, I would almost say I wasn't really encouraged to get to know the other students all that well. And, unfortunately I was scared of them, to be honest. My first week there, when I was introducing myself in the cafeteria, I went and sat down, and this kid, you know, I'm sure in a moment of just pure frustration of being there, when he found out that I was Narvin's son, he was just like, kind of absorbed that for a second. And he was like, when I get out of here, I'm going to find you and I'm going to hurt you.
Yeah.
So that was sort of my first impression of other, students. And my family probably felt the same way. My father probably felt the same way. Like he just was worried about my safety is what you would hope that was.
Yeah.
And kept me out of the dorms for that reason. But otherwise, I got corrections from the staff. I was probably got special treatment, in retrospect. But to be honest, I have blocked a lot of that out. I don't remember much more than my first maybe month there.
Okay.
Just seeing other kids especially get restrained, and worse, getting beatings and that sort of thing was pretty heavy.
Okay. I would have still argued that just you being there is well, anybody being there is horrible, even if you're there as a more of an observer, you know what I mean? I still feel like it's psychologically damaging.
Yeah.
Definitely. Do you remember them? Did they have seminars at the first place you went?
So Dundee was actually, this was right after the riot had shut Dundee down. So the program wasn't in operation while I was there. I was just there by myself with like a skeleton crew, basically. Working like a school makeup packet from Utah. that's basically all I was doing. While I'm not exactly sure what the delay was in moving me from Dundee to CSA, but
Okay, so you were kind of just like at this facility, but there was like nothing really going on at the facility because it had already been shut down, essentially. So you were essentially just waiting to be transported to the other place, but there was a huge like wait.
yeah, that was roughly 2 month wait period for whatever reason. Yeah.
Interesting. What were you fed? What did you eat when you were there, when you were in that waiting period?
Just the staple that, as far as I understood, it was the staple that the other students got. It was just beans and rice,
Okay.
some fruit juice.
And how many people would you say, like, if you had to make an estimate, were there when you were there?
At Dundee
Dundee.
or at CSA?
Yeah, at Dundee.
Dundee, like I said, there weren't any other survivors there. There weren't any other teenagers there. It was just me.
Oh, okay. Okay, never mind. Then how many people at Carolina Springs when you got there?
Carolina Springs, that would have been, it's hard to say. I would say that his operational maximum at CSA was maybe somewhere between like 300 or 400 kids.
Okay. Okay. And when you got there, how were you transported between Dundee to Carolina Springs? Or did you go yourself again, or?
So at that point, I flew to South Carolina from Costa Rica with Narvin, and then I was dropped off at our house basically. But from that point on, I was basically attended at all times by Billy Owens, who was the transporter for CSA.
Okay. Do you were Billy Owens and Narvin or Robert were they like friends, or do you know how they met? Was it just
Billy Owen, I think he was I'm honestly not sure how they made that connection. He was he worked for Narvin for many, many, many years. He worked for Narvin close to 15 years, something like that, before he died.
okay. Okay.
And he did, along with others, he did the majority of the transports, the kidnappings.
Okay. What was what was the worst thing you think you saw at Carolina Springs Academy when you were there, or worst thing you heard about?
The worst thing that I heard about certainly was a kid who punched out a window and took a shard of glass to defend himself with against the staff, and he did not have a good time of it after that. Yeah, that's an incident that really stands out in my mind. Was
Did he die, or?
not to, no, I don't think he died, but he was pretty severely beaten.
Okay. And what were you gonna say after that? Sorry.
I mean, it was fairly routine when I was there. You know, occasionally you would just have a kid just get fed up with it, right, and stand up and just throw a tray down, whatever. You know, the male staff there, huge guys. They would take them to the floor really roughly, or take them to, intervention was called OP there. They would put them in this little shack, essentially, with no air conditioning, make them kneel, put them in, or other uncomfortable, really uncomfortable positions, like lay on their stomach, that sort of thing. And they just had to stay in there for hours and hours and hours.
Okay. That was
I was lucky enough not to have to do that myself, but I saw it very, very frequently.
Did they have you policing the lower levels at all? Since you were Narvin's son, or
No.
related? No, they didn't have you doing any of that. Okay.
No.
What level did you get to at Carolina Springs? Or did they have?
I'm not sure that I remember. I know that I didn't really have much beyond my sweatshirt and my sweatpants. I just kind of would go to the school, didn't have much privileges, or really, I didn't participate really in any activities while I was there. Sort of just went to the school, went to the schoolhouse that they had on property, and then I'd go home, basically.
Did you ever wonder if just or did it feel like to you that they just didn't, your family just didn't want you, and because it seems like to me they didn't even want you going through the program at all, whether that was because your family and they don't want their family going through it, or whether that was because of some other reason. But it's just curious how they just had you kind of be the observer there, which can be just as damaging. But it just, to me, I would wonder, what the fuck is the point of this? You know what I mean?
I'm certain, like I said, in retrospect, I'm certain that was part of it. Like, they didn't necessarily want me to go through the entire experience, right? Because they
Yeah.
had to know how horrible it was there. They had
Yeah.
to know the
Yeah.
conditions. So it was a bit of a double standard, right?
Yeah. Did you get a lot of or did you feel a lot of animosity? Or I know you were talking about some people like wanting to like talking about violence towards you. Did you feel that a lot, or did you witness that a lot towards other kids towards you, or?
No. I mean, it, you know, just obviously I was the owner's son, so I got treated. I wouldn't say I was isolated necessarily, but people sort of kept their distance. They didn't want to get hurt for interacting with me, I guess, is the idea, right?
or
Like,
or be worried that possibly you would tell
or that
other.
I would tell on them or
Yeah.
something. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm sure
Now, did Carolina Springs Academy, did that have seminars?
it did.
Okay. Did you have to participate in that bit of it?
I don't remember, honestly. I know, so I did actually go back after I graduated high school and I worked at Carolina Springs for uh like most of a year. And I did staff the seminars at that time. I would staff it the first couple of days. They didn't let me do the third day.
Okay. And was that Discovery or Focus? Do you
I,
remember, or just
maybe
one
maybe it would
seminar?
have been Discovery. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay, that's fine. And that was after you had been in the program yourself, right? And then you finished up high school afterwards, and then you went back to staff, correct?
Yeah, I was there to save up money to go on a LDS mission. That seemed like my best option at the time. Let's go
Okay.
work for the family. Um, but I should have done something else.
What, um, what, what made you leave Carolina Springs Academy? Like, how did that happen?
Um, it's pretty dark incident actually. I had a to without going too much into it, there was an older employee. She was, I was 18 at the time. She was about 36. She came up from Costa Rica and she took advantage of me. And I was pretty traumatized by that experience. Um, Basically derailed the entire reason I was there. The LDS Church had, at the time, they had a very, very, very strict definition of what they called the law of chastity. So even victims of rape or, you know, molestation, anything like that, they were considered to be accountable for their own trauma and not allowed to serve. So after that experience, I was told that I wasn't worthy to go on the mission. I was pretty disheartened, uh, pretty, obviously pretty upset about what had happened, and just chose to go back home.
Did anything ever happen with that, or did you just kind of, after that happened, you kind of just like nothing could be done about it because it had happened and you're there?
She went back to Costa Rica. Yeah,
Does that still affect you to this day? Like, do you still deal with?
certainly. Yeah, yeah. I mean, obviously, I think any survivor of any kind of sexual assault or any situation where they were manipulated into having a sexual relationship with a much older person, that stuff haunts you. It really does, especially when you're young. and still developing, it can't help but linger.
Definitely. Yeah, I was raped when I was 7, so I know the feeling.
I'm sorry, man.
I feel for you. So wait a minute, hold on a sec. So you went to Carolina Springs Academy, left there, finished up high school, went back to Carolina Springs Academy, and then left there, and then was going to go on the LDS thing, right? And then that thing happened, right? So what happened after that?
I just went back to Utah, basically I had an idea in my head that I was going to go to college down at the University of Utah. So I met up with an old high school friend, moved down to Salt Lake City. I was there for a while. Um, had a hard time making money, basically. I would say it was probably had to have been a couple more years because it was around the summer of 07 that Narvin opened up Gulf Coast Academy, which was the facility that replaced Bethel and Boostell. And he told me that they needed a tutor at the school out there. I was pretty against the idea of going back and being a full-time staff. So I refused at first, but he just kept insisting. He was like, "Oh, it'll be good money. It'll be good money. We really need the help. Please, please, please." So I was like, "Okay, I'm just going to be a tutor for the summer." I went back out there, and then, like I detailed in the documentary, it turned out to be quite different than that.
What did they have you doing? Like did they just have you doing everything there?
I made a point that I didn't want anything to do with being like a disciplinarian. I didn't want to be staff.
Yeah.
Right. I wanted to work on the school side and help kids with school as much as you could call it school. Much like Ivy Ridge, they used that switched on schoolhouse program. Just
Yeah.
garbage, just purely no value to it at all.
Yeah.
But what we were mainly doing, I asked my friend actually to come help me because we had an influx of students from Tranquility Bay that came to Gulf Coast for a while. And they all needed their transcripts updated. So, about 12-hour days for most of that summer trying to get everybody's transcripts updated and ready to go for when they were to either ideally, graduate and go home or be, less ideally be transferred to another program.
Did you see a lot of did restraint report, like did they have reports of restraint like they had in the documentary? Like did they have that kind of stuff at Gulf Coast? And if they did, did any of that stuff come across your desk ever?
Just to be completely honest, Gulf Coast was a shit show. We were really, really, really trying to stay above water the entire time. So any sort of official paperwork, no, I don't believe so.
Okay. And they weren't accredited, obviously. Probably not, right? So none of the fucking school meant anything anyway.
None of it mattered anyway. Okay. Yeah, what a nightmare.
How long?
If anybody's...
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, if anybody was there, I actually still am in touch with, one person that I met there at the time, and anybody else that happens to be watching, I'm sorry. What you all deserved so much better than that. Just what a nightmare.
Yeah, for real. How long did they have you working there?
So that was that summer. That was from May to, we left about the end of August. And
okay, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but I'm very curious how much they were paying you for this?
It was
probably people in general, like.
In general, hard to say. It was probably for the male staff at the time, not very well. I wouldn't know off the top of my head. I got for my time there for the month or for the summer that I was there. I probably left with somewhere around $1,500. Wasn't a ton.
For a whole summer, damn. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
It'll be good money. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't good money.
Yeah. Even if it was, it still would have been worth it. It still would have been a fucking shit show, but
yeah, it was a mess. We were constantly fighting to get anything there. We were fighting to get beds. We were fighting to get like clothes. We were fighting to get hygiene products. But I would literally, for some reason it was my responsibility to call Narvin because Narvin was the one that ultimately signed off on everything right that he was the one that had the reins to all the paychecks. I would call him and he would literally say, pray about it, and things will work out. And I'd be like, dude, I am calling you to tell you we need X amount of dollars to repair these fucking desktops from 1997 that we're all working with. What good is praying gonna do? But that was,
that's insane. What was he doing during this time? Like, was he just off buying shit and like buying animals that he was gonna later on neglect and like what was he? Is that what he was doing?
Those years, man, those were wild years for him, especially. He was bouncing between Carolina Springs, Pillars of Hope, and Gulf Coast. His mental health was starting to take a pretty sharp decline. He was he just wasn't very healthy physically. He just honestly don't know what he spent most of his time doing. Like when he came out to the facility, he just stayed in an RV basically and was kind of just seemed like he was sick a lot of the time. I don't know.
And so you didn't have a lot of contact with Robert during this time, did you?
Robert, or Bob, as we all call him, no, not really. I was I was close with one of his sons when I was younger, but as I've gotten older, I haven't honestly had a lot of contact with that family.
Do you know what like when you guys kind of started to drift apart? Was there a reason for that happening?
I mean, they just don't like they just don't like each other. Robert and Irvin, they just can't stand each other.
You think it's just their two egos just can't?
It's hard to say for Bob. He's kind of an aloof guy. Really keeps a lot of stuff close to his chest.
So you never know.
I mean, I think he had a lot of contempt for Narvin, because Narvin is just not a very, especially when it came to the schools, the financial and the business side of it, he actually just wasn't very competent at what he was doing. So, and then on the flip side, Narvin was just a very jealous person, extremely jealous. He really wanted to have the level of success that Robert had. He wanted the money, he wanted the lifestyle, but he didn't, he didn't have the patience to actually set the groundwork as whatever you would like to call that existed.
Why do you think they kept letting Narvin like open these schools and whatnot when he was being so detrimental to the bottom line?
Because it put him further and further debt in with Robert. Just Robert was more than happy to loan him the money because he was like, all right, well, you'll just be paying this off,
Yeah.
for the rest of your life.
Okay.
Pretty much.
Whatever happened to the animals? And like, does he just not like animals? Like,
Yeah, it's interesting. There was an interview years back. I've tried to find it in the time since. I've never been able to find this interview that he did with this local news station where they had gone out to the property in Carolina Springs. They were filming because he had farm animals there at the time. He had like sheep and I think a few goats and cows and stuff, as well as the horses, and they were all dying. They were in just terrible, terrible shape. And you can see this interviewer talking to Narvin about it. And the guy is just like, so, look at the condition of these animals, these starving animals. And you just see Narvin's face as he's looking at it. And it was like he just couldn't see it. There's like a veil over his eyes. He was having
on. That's fucking insane.
Mhm. Same thing with the horses. I mean, most infamously, the two herds of horses that he neglected and allowed to starve to death and die. He was more concerned with the idea of owning horses. He really wanted to be that guy, He wanted to be this successful, like famous horse breeder. He wanted to establish his own breed that were a mix of Peruvian and Andalusian lines. He wanted to have his very own breed that people would come to him for. But when it came to actually being a responsible horse owner, he just was completely incompetent at that, just like most things that he did.
Yeah, it seems like he was more concerned with like the image of how people perceived him than like actually buying things because it meant something to him. You know what I mean?
100%.
Sure. What do you think the hardest part, or did you see anything really messed up at Carolina Springs Academy when you were there? Or did you hear about anything?
Carolina Springs, by the time that I went back and worked there.
Oh, no, not Carolina Springs. I mean, Gulf Coast Academy. Sorry.
I mean, yeah, it just the conditions there, period, right? At any of these programs were just deeply fucked, right? They're just intrinsically, it just, especially, and it did feel like, especially at Gulf Coast, just because we were struggling so hard just to maintain basic supplies for these kids. It just, they would go without showers and there was a lot of conflict because of the new kids coming in from TB and the kids that had already been there that they'd seeded the population of the school with to begin with. Nothing crazy happened while I was there, nothing really intense, but not long after I left, I heard that there was a male staff member who basically just hosted fight clubs.
That happened just Spring Creek.
Yeah. And then not long after that, there was a riot on the male side that shut the place down.
Okay. Do you know any of the details? Do you know anything, like, was anybody killed or injured in the riot, or was it fairly easily contained?
So I'd heard from my friend's family who was there living on the property at the time. Said it was a pretty scary experience. I don't think that anyone died. Thank God, like nobody died. I don't believe that anyone got seriously injured, but I'm sure there were injuries. I mean, in any experience like that, there's bound to be.
Yeah.
they essentially just, smashed windows, destroyed property, did what they should do to get the police's attention, and the police came in and shut the place down.
Good. What do you think the hardest part about being in all of these schools was, and how did you deal with it when you were there?
The hardest part was the reality of it, right? Like I had grown up with a very, very carefully controlled narrative of what these places were. And even as a young man, being there myself as a student, and then later coming back as staff, and honestly seeing some traumatic things as staff. Like, I never restrained anybody. Again, I didn't want to be any part of that, but seeing it happen was a real wake-up call. Just all of that is stuff that stays with you. It haunts you. It's when you see it, it's clearly something that's not supposed to be happening, right?
Exactly. Did they train you how to do how you should be doing restraints? Was there any training in that field?
They offered to give me that training, and I elected not to take it. I said I wasn't going to. I wasn't going to do any of that. I mean, when I was there at CSA, again, I was largely just there to be at the school. I was in the schoolhouse. I was a tutor. That's as much involvement as I wanted with that side of things.
Yeah. Okay. If you could go
I
back
think
in a time, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say there is absolutely an experience that an action I took that I still deeply regret was I didn't, and this was the one thing that is kind of mind blowing, is that as a new staff, they don't explain corrections to you. They don't explain the system. They just don't. They're like, okay, here's a sheet of paper. Here's the corrections, like the ranking of the corrections and the point totals, but not what that means, not the context for the point totals. And here are the justifications for each correction. And some of them were fucking ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like a cat 4, you could give a kid a cat 4 for swearing, which as a young, uptight Mormon, I did. I gave a guy a cat 4 for swearing. Took him back months and months and months of progress. And I was shocked. I was like, I didn't realize that was what was going to happen. And he, if I hope he's okay wherever he is in life. I'm deeply, deeply sorry that I did that, because I'm sure that is just a nightmare to have someone just take away all of your progress and put you down to nothing. Is just, it's dehumanizing.
Yeah. Yeah, I honestly think it's scary, just like the fact that they gave us that much power over the lower level students when we got to a certain level. I never really,
yeah.
I never really abused that, because by the time I got to the upper levels, I had already been rebelling for a year and getting removed and spending my days in like intervention and worksheets. So I already knew what it was like to suffer and struggle and be an outcast. So when I got on the upper levels, I was actually like, because people would pick on like the lower levels, and just like they would pick certain students every morning and be like, those are the 2 people I'm just gonna pick on today, and just like give fuck tons of consequences to, and just because I don't like them. And so if I saw him doing shit like that, it'd be like, okay, well, self-correct your major disrespect. Oh, you want to be an asshole? Okay, staff corrected. And I just do it to all the staff members, and just like stick up for people. And just like the people that were getting targeted, I'd literally like pretty much just safeguard him and be like, if you're going to consequence him, you're going to get consequence too, because it's major disrespect. You're targeting him. So I don't know. There's just, but at the same time, that kind of fucking absolute power corrupts absolutely. Like it will corrupt. people after a certain amount of time, and it's just like it's
And
really
you were still a kid yourself. You were in a vulnerable position, and it was a mind game. It was a mind fuck. They deliberately did that to you, to us, to all of us, right?
yeah,
It to screw with us, to screw with our sense of what was right and wrong, really, to make us feel guilty afterwards. Like, oh, can I even speak out about this? I did this, right?
yeah.
Like it, all of it was, I would say all of it was deliberate. All of it was designed that way.
Definitely, definitely. If you could go back in a time machine and not go through these schools, would you do it, and why? Knowing what you know now.
I definitely would not go back as staff. I would not have gone back and worked there. I would have kept my distance from the family and from the business. And ultimately, I would hope that I would get to this point where I am and speak out the same way. I don't know if I would be able to offer the exact same level of validation, having not been able to see some of the things I saw from that perspective. But, still just for my own conscience, I'd rather not have lived through that. No.
Okay. And how do you think we fix this? How do you think we make this better? How do you think we close these schools?
Honestly, the time is just, this is an amazing time to be alive. We've got more reach than we've ever had. You know, there's just so much more momentum thanks to, like Paris Hilton, all the protesting, all the legislation that's been out there. It's just, this is the time. This is when we do this. And I think a lot of people are hoping for, or I guess I should say, some people probably are hoping for a slightly more like dramatic, like, oh, hey, we go there and we close it down ourselves. But like, doing the adult things that you should be doing for any real change that you want to make, calling your local representatives, making sure that they've got legislation, or putting the pressure on until they start legislation for regulation for these places is a very, very vital first step that just hasn't, unfortunately, hasn't been happening until the last, except for the last 5, 6 years. Um, the other thing that people can be doing, as we all saw, they just opened up the local DA up there in New York, um, just opened up an investigation of Ivy Ridge. That's something that everyone can do because, as we've been told, I think a lot of people had this fear that, oh, there's no evidence. I don't have hard evidence. I don't have pictures. I don't have video. Testimony is evidence. Reach out to the local sheriff's offices, reach out to the local DA where the programs were. Just tell them, I was abused. I suffered at these places. What are you doing about it?
Or even I didn't even know that. So even in my situation, with all the testimonials I have, with people's permission, of course, um, I could potentially make some progress with that too. Um,
I think I think there is a sort of a unique situation in New York with the statute of limitations, but
yeah,
there's no reason not to do that, right? Like,
yeah,
look into it, call your sheriff's office, and especially where the programs are still operating. Call your sheriff's offices, call your DA, say, listen, there's there's abuse. I suffered abuse. There is absolutely still abuse happening. An investigation needs to be opened or continued.
Have you done? You live in Utah, right?
Mm.
Have you done? What have you done anything on your end? Or have you been doing anything like advocacy wise, like since you realized like what these places like were doing? really doing?
So because I took part in the documentary, I signed a non-disclosure agreement with Netflix. My ability to participate in other things was fairly limited. But in the time since, I mean, anytime someone comes to me with like, a petition to be signed, asks for information, that sort of thing, I've tried to make myself as available as possible. And I hope, I can't say too much about what our next steps are as a group, but
Yeah.
we're looking forward to some pretty big things coming down.
Yeah, I have my eyes and my brain. I'm brainstorming how to put a spotlight on the Spring Creek Lodge Academy documentary because I feel like documentaries needs to be done in every school, but I specifically Spring Creek Lodge. I feel like because I went there, there's a lot of people that would really like to see that come to light. So
Seems like there's a really dark underbelly to Spring Creek Lodge, especially. So yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of stuff that people don't like. I was just talking to somebody that I was there with just last night, and like he said some shit that like blew my fucking mind because like I didn't even remember that like we used to get our ass beat all the time, like multiple, like all the time, like just because people didn't like me, like
Yeah.
so I mean like shit like that just happened that I completely blocked out. Like I knew there was violence and I knew that I participated in violence, but not on the level that he reminded me that it happened to us like a lot. And so shit like that is just it's crazy how much shit you can block out and how like you can literally block out entire like segments of an experience like it didn't even happen. It's really just
Yeah.
insane. And it's another reason I do this work is just like I'm still healing, you know. Every interview I do I feel like heals me a little bit more because it's just I feel that I don't feel so alone and just people say things that I'm like holy shit that actually did happen or I remember that. So it's really important.
Extremely important, man. It's very validating work.
Is there anything else you think people should know about your family or about you or about your experience or about maybe something you would tell a parent thinking about sending their kid to a place like this?
Um, the important thing I think to keep in mind is just that and I hoped, with as much as I had to say about the Litchfield family in the documentary that was negative, I do hope that it gave people a sort of human that they are people as corrupt and as for sort of soulless as some of the choices that they've made have been. The members of the family that really had nothing to do with the programs aside from some members of that family obviously benefited, but I would just ask people to keep in mind they're still people, um, that, like I've said elsewhere, there's an appropriate place to channel that very, very, very valid anger and frustration. Just make sure that we're moving forward in a positive way, in a way that's going to help the dream that we all have of getting these places closed, right? No more kids going to these schools. As for something I would say to those parents, like I've heard a lot of justifications in like just the past week. I've heard a lot of justifications like, well, hey, if we hadn't done something, something seriously bad would have happened to you. And you can obviously a lot of that for a lot of cases for survivors is just laughable, right? Like for a lot of survivors, it was not a life or death situation. That's all part of the brainwashing. But in those severe cases where kids genuinely needed loving intervention, we maybe don't necessarily know what the answer is. It's like a complicated situation that required present, loving families directly involved, right? But we do know that the answer wasn't this. Everyone should know at this point that this was not the answer. To send kids to these long-term residential treatment centers built on these fucking cult beliefs is just ridiculous. Nobody deserved this.
Amen to that. And I have one more question. Do you think it was ever about truly wanting to make a difference, or do you feel like it was all about money?
It's a complicated question. I think for some people that got involved, it was about making a difference, at least at first. I think there were individuals at the programs who genuinely cared. As misguided as it was to be working there, to be working through that medium, like I said about the Litchfield family, they were people. They were doing their best with as limited an understanding as they had, and they also went through the same kind of brainwashing that survivors did and their families did. So, ultimately, I would say at the very top, the administrative level, unfortunately, I would say that it was almost entirely about money. But on the ground, it's a little more complicated.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate you. And I would you be open to a part 2 someday? Because I have a feeling that when we put this episode out, I have a feeling people are going to be like, well, you should have asked him this, or you should have asked him that. Or if you remember anything, that would be awesome. I just would like to keep in touch, and I would love to do part 2 with you if you're open to it.
For sure, man. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you guys so much for watching so far in the video. And if you haven't already liked the video, please do that. It really helps the algorithm. And subscribe if you're not already, and share the videos. And let's just get these places shut down. Thank you so much. Catch you on the next one, guys. Bye.